Well, you're with Alan Juddy, and this is another episode of Seed Dating, the podcast where you get to meet one of Agricom's forage products, learn about its attributes, and match it to your farm system. And here to help nurture this blossoming relationship is our very own forage relationship expert, Alistair Moorhead. Hi, Al, and who are we going to meet today?
Hi, Juddy. Today we're going to meet a real bundle of energy, so let's meet Spitfire.
Spitfire. Is that like the plane?
No, Juddy. There's nothing plain about Spitfire. It's an exceptional forage rape.
It's a summer brassica, a real gun in the summer dry. I wonder if you could pilot me through the discussion about what a forage rape is.
Oh, good one, Juddy. Good one. Rapes are Brassica napus. They are a relation to, for example, canola, and others will be familiar with these around the world. But these are specific forage plants that are designed to be utilised from a spring sowing as a summer crop. Some of them, like Spitfire, can be also used in late summer, sown in late summer for winter grazing as well. So quite good use both in summertime and in early winter.
Yeah, so the theory is you take some moisture that drops in the spring, and you're going to take that as feed to hold it through period when it gets dry.
Absolutely. They're literally a standing hay shed made of protein as opposed to no protein in hay.
Okay, and so tell me a little bit about Spitfire as a forage rape. How does that differ from some of the other forage rapes that we might see?
Spitfire is a late maturity forage rape, so it's typically what we describe as one of your high yielding first graze models. So you're taking it out to about 90 days before you're utilising it. Typically, we're sowing this at the end of the second month of spring, and we're utilising it pretty much well into the new year, probably the end of the middle of summer, basically, is when we start grazing this type of rape. And because it's a 90 to plus day rape, they tend to have a high first yield. So they stand well over your hip height, depending on your climate. But you don't need a lot of moisture from the right time to grow a really good crop of rape. So they're really efficient ways of capturing the end of spring moisture and taking it forward in summer, as you described earlier.
Right, so it's one of the later, what we call later maturity rapes.
Correct.
We're looking at a big first up yield. Do we get a regrowth in terms of that?
Yeah, Spitfire is outstanding for regrowth, and I think that's one of its strongest traits. The discussion around regrowth is quite awkward because how much regrowth or time for regrowth you get depends on when you first start grazing. So we have earlier maturity material that you can start grazing 20 to 30 days before Spitfire. And of course, that gives that type of product a chance to regrow more times throughout the growing season. And so when you get into these 90 plus day or late maturity rapes, which high first yield, you tend to find eating that first yield and the time it takes to eat it, plus the time it takes to get to your first grazing, means that you only have a certain amount of time to get more regrowth and through the late summer and autumn. Typically, we can get a couple of grazings through the growing season, and then it's about whether you shut it up for early winter feed or undersow it with Italian or annual ryegrass to get a combination feed into early winter. But Spitfire's got outstanding regrowth potential. It just is limited in the numbers it can do.
And I guess in terms of being rape and being one of these long maturity rapes, typically what we find is that stem is a large part of the total amount of the plant. There's a bit of a party trick you've got with Spitfire around its stem.
Absolutely. I think it's got a couple of very strong traits, very distinguishable traits. One of them is actually insect tolerance, actually, and it would be an industry-leading product for aphid tolerance, which is a great benefit. Doesn't mean you don't spray for aphids if you're under severe pressure, but what it might mean is that there will be individuals out there that won't have to, which for some varieties you can't say. They'll be spraying most paddocks for aphids under stress. But it's actual, like you described it nicely, its party trick is that actually you can break this plant at about 3 or 4 centimetres above the ground, maybe just say 6 or 7 centimetres, just to make it a little bit more realistic, getting above that very woody base. You can often break this plant with your hands and just snap it. Now, that's a big deal because stem tends to be quite lignified, and with time becomes very, very hard for animals to graze.
Yeah, and I guess that's the difference between having something where you've got a high total yield, but actually the edible yield is actually relatively low because you're leaving a lot of stem behind. The ability to snap a stem that low down indicates that it's still very preferable to grazing livestock. And you've also seen that in some of the grazing work that's happened.
Yeah, you're correct. You're absolutely right, but not in one context. So even our second grazing, you can snap the stem of Spitfire, which is very unusual. Most people need wee saws to cut through those stems. But you've actually done this work. You've actually published this work in New Zealand Grasslands, based out of Bay of Plenty, Tauranga Grasslands Conference. I can't remember what year that was, but this has led to us being able to measure a quality difference in the stem of Spitfire. However, no matter what we think is different, animals do not like rape stem or stem of brassicas. So you must have the stocking pressure and the desire to push animals into what will always be a slightly lower quality part of the plant, but what you've already captured as yield, you must push animals in to graze it. Now, the difference is they don't want to graze it, even Spitfire. The difference with Spitfire is if you ask them to graze it, they'll actually do quite well on it because it's measurably different from many other rapes.
And why do we think we've got that difference?
Oh, mate, I don't know. I think I did not see that coming. It was something we observed very quickly. Again, because when you start harvesting and measuring on second, third cuts, and you can actually physically start breaking the stems, that's very, very unusual.
Yes.
And so we saw that quite early on. I do not know. It's a trait I value now, and I wouldn't want to be without as far as a style goes. I think Spitfire is a very complete 90-day rape. It's not the most outright highest yield, but as we've just discussed, if you ask animals to eat that stem, they can, and not only if they can, they will still continue to produce well on it. And then it can regrow very vigorously. It's a very healthy plant in a regrowth phase.
I think the other part about this around the lack of huge residual stem is it also helps in terms of, as you've indicated earlier, we can be stitching other things into that.
Correct.
And that makes that job a whole lot easier if we're not dealing with huge amounts of residual stem.
I would point out there, you will still have huge amounts of residual stem. You've got to have trust that the stem is special and good, and therefore stock heavily to actually eat it.
Yeah,
of course. So that's one of my big statements about regrowth rapes particularly. You get one chance to eat the stem. That is the first time, and there is no stock classes that like to come back in and eat the stem in multiple grazings. You tend to find the stem is left over time. So you have to work to eat it, but the bigger point is that when you eat it, it's good.
Excellent. And so let's talk about some of the farm systems that we might see Spitfire really contributing to and adding value to. What springs to mind?
Well, what springs to mind is environments that probably don't have long regrowth phases through the summer and early autumn. So an environment that cools down quite early is probably more attractive to have a single harvest of rape and then direct drill a grass in while you still have germination times and growth potential. So for me, it's environments where you might grow 8 to 9 tons, maybe even 10 tons of dry matter on a first graze. You push to utilize that as hard as you can. So you minimize the amount of residual stem, as you say, but stocking rate and intensity is what you require to do that. And you'll tend to find that might take quite a long time when you've got a 10-ton crop. So you might find that it takes literally weeks upon weeks to graze paddocks of this type of product. And then by the end of the summer, and cold environments, it's a really suitable time to get young grass and straight through the rape crop and get the two things coming through. So my typical model would be one hard graze followed by an undersow, one hard graze or just being then shut up for winter regrowth and then being utilised in May and June. They would be the two primaries. If you're in a warmer environment, a warmer autumn environment, you could definitely go for a 2 summer graze phase and then shutting up for winter feed. But it does have a big impact on how fast you cool down in the autumn to what you drill into these paddocks afterwards.
Any preference between sheep, cattle, deer?
I think sheep and cattle are very much more kind to rape grazing, and you tend to find plant survival is much higher with both sheep and deer. With cattle, they do get quite brutal. They're a big, heavy animal, and you tend to find they break a lot more things and they damage a lot more plants. So you tend to find plant thinning is greater under cattle grazing in general, and you tend to find the desire to undersow from a cattle system is probably more aligned. In the sheep and deer systems, you tend to find you actually will get excellent plant survival, and therefore your plant density will be very high. And so your regrowth potential tends to be greater from a sheep and deer system. So as long as you understand that, graze with cattle, hard on plants, probably better to undersow and or quit out and then sow perennial pasture. Sheep and deer give you the option for multi-graze regrowth because of the sheer numbers of plants that survive the grazing.
And
does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think the other point here is, and you did labour the point, and I think it's fair, that if you don't stock appropriately, you are still going to get big stems because Correct. We've got a big forage rape plant there to start with. What the research did show though is there are some other rapes that could be equally as big. We are even given a high stocking rate, they won't eat the stem.
No,
so I think you're right. The allocation at that point and hitting your residuals is important, but at least in the Spitfire, you have a rape where that's very achievable, where we know that there are some other, particularly giant rapes, right, where there is no way you're going to get livestock to eat stem because it is so lignified.
And more importantly, if they eat it, they won't do that well.
Oh, correct.
Whereas, we've measured, got some really strong measurements about what that quality trait reverts to. We haven't mentioned the second job of this style of rape, which is the summer sown for winter feed. And so again, because of that high health point, because of the quality of the stem, it is a very classical, traditional early autumn, even late summer sown winter feed. And for that, it's quite capable again of that time of year growing that sort of 8 to 10 ton growth range, depending on climate and when your growth is actually occurring.
So that would do a similar job to a kale, for example, but from a later sowing date.
Correct, or much later sowing date, and more resilient on that break time frame, so faster to establish, faster to get going, whereas kale is just slightly slower, and I wouldn't be sowing kale beyond a certain point in that sort of late summer period because you just have such a slow establishing plant compared to a Spitfire. And Spitfire for that role works exceptionally well, probably targeting the first over half of winter, so probably the first 2 months of winter. You tend to find if you want to graze in August, the end of winter in our terms, I would still be using kale for that job more so than rape because rape is quite an old plant by the end of winter. So again, you're trying to load it to the first half of the autumn and winter grazing window.
Cool. And so I guess the thing that really sticks out here is that the dry matter, the palatability of that stem is quite different given the high yield of that. And as you pointed out earlier, the excellent aphid tolerance that we seem to get here. Saying
very healthy plant.
Very healthy plant. So a really, if you're thinking about Spitfire, a really beautiful piece of engineering.
I would say so. And when I look at my succession planning and what I'm asking for in the future of this category, to be quite frank, it is just very, very similar to what Spitfire is today. And I keep asking myself what trait I would value extra. And actually, at the end of the day, I can continue to struggle with understanding what I would like to see ahead of what Spitfire is today.
Excellent.
So it's a really complete late maturity rape.
So if I'm identifying today as a dairy farmer, this might be something that goes really good in my runoff for young stock. Would that be a
yes? And for a May, June. Moderate grazing in a dryland block, it would fit that model really nicely, Glenn.
Excellent.
Well picked.
I might swipe right and say that's exactly the one for me. So you've been listening to another episode of Seed Dating with Alan Juddy. Hope you can catch another episode real soon.